I used to believe that blood was thicker than water. I used to believe that the person who shared your childhood, your secrets, your parents, and your home would never become your greatest enemy. I used to believe in my sister. That belief cost me nearly everything I had, including my sanity, my relationship, my savings, my reputation, and 3 years of my life that I will never get back. But in the end, it also gave me something I never expected. It gave me the truth, and sometimes the truth is the most devastating weapon of all. My name is Emma Whitfield, and this is the story of how my sister Charlotte became the person I fear most in this world, and how I made sure she would never hurt anyone the way she hurt me ever again. I need to start at the beginning, not because it is comfortable, but because you need to understand what we were before you can truly comprehend what we became. Charlotte was born 3 years before me in a small town in Sussex, England. Our parents, Margaret and Robert Whitfield, had tried for years to conceive, and when Charlotte finally arrived, she was treated like a miracle. By the time I came along, the novelty had worn off somewhat. I was loved, do not get me wrong, but I was never worshipped the way Charlotte was. She was the firstborn, the golden child, the one whose photographs lined the hallway in ornate frames while mine were tucked into albums that no one ever opened. Growing up, I adored her. I thought the sun rose and set with her approval. When Charlotte smiled at me, I felt like the luckiest girl in the world. When she ignored me, I would spend hours trying to figure out what I had done wrong. She had this way about her, even as a child, this magnetic charm that made everyone want to be near her. Teachers adored her. Other children wanted to be her friend. Our parents beamed whenever she walked into a room. And I followed behind, always in her shadow, always trying to catch up. I remember one Christmas when I was 7 and she was 10. Our grandmother had given us both matching dolls, beautiful porcelain things with painted faces and silk dresses. Charlotte had looked at hers with disdain, then glanced at mine and announced that she wanted it instead because the ribbon in my doll's hair was a prettier shade of blue. Our mother had laughed nervously and suggested we trade, and because I wanted Charlotte to love me, I handed over my doll without a word. She broke it within a week, and when I cried, she told me I was being dramatic. That memory should have told me everything I needed to know about her, but love is blind, especially the love a younger sister has for an older one. As we grew older, our paths diverged. Charlotte was beautiful, with our mother's delicate features and our father's dark hair. She was popular and effortlessly charming, and boys lined up to date her from the time she turned 14. I was quieter, more bookish, more interested in studying than parties. Where Charlotte glided through life on her looks and charisma, I had to work for everything I achieved. I did not resent her for it, not then. I simply accepted that we were different people with different strengths. Charlotte left for university in London when I was 15, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. Without her constant presence, I discovered who I was outside of being Charlotte's younger sister. I found my voice in the school newspaper. I made friends who liked me for me, not because they wanted to get closer to her. I earned top marks and secured a place at Cambridge to study business. When I told my parents, my father actually cried with pride. It was the first time I ever remember him crying. Charlotte, who had scraped through a communications degree with a third-class result, did not come home for my graduation party. She claimed she had a work commitment, but I later found out she had gone to Ibiza with a group of friends instead. I tried not to let it hurt me. I told myself that we were adults now, that we had our own lives, and that distance did not mean we loved each other any less. I was so desperate to maintain the illusion of the perfect sisterly bond that I would have believed anything. After Cambridge, I moved to London and began working for a marketing firm. The hours were brutal, and the pay was modest, but I loved it. I was building something of my own, brick by brick, and for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely proud of myself. Charlotte was also in London by then, working in public relations for a small agency. We saw each other occasionally, usually for obligatory family dinners or our parents' birthdays, and those visits were pleasant enough. She seemed happy for my success, or at least she said the right words. I had no reason to doubt her. Then I met Daniel. Daniel Morrison was an architect at a firm that shared our office building. We kept running into each other in the coffee shop on the ground floor, and after 3 months of awkward small talk and nervous laughter, he finally asked me out. He was kind, genuinely kind in a way that felt almost rare. He listened when I talked. He remembered small details about my life. He made me laugh until my sides ached, and when he looked at me, I felt seen in a way I never had before. 6 months into our relationship, I knew I was going to marry him. A year later, he proposed on a rainy evening in Hyde Park, getting down on one knee in the mud without a second thought. I said yes before he even finished the question. I wanted Charlotte to be happy for me. I needed her to be happy for me. So when I called to tell her the news, I was practically vibrating with excitement. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just a beat too long, before she squealed with what I assumed was joy. Oh my God, Emma, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you. You have to let me help plan the wedding. I insist. I was so relieved that I agreed immediately. Looking back, I realized that pause should have warned me. That fraction of a second of silence contained everything that was about to destroy my life. The wedding planning began, and at first, Charlotte was the perfect maid of honor. She accompanied me to dress fittings, helped me choose flowers, and offered opinions on venues with an enthusiasm that made me believe she genuinely cared. Daniel adored her, calling her the fun sister and laughing at her jokes during family dinners. My parents were delighted that their daughters were finally bonding as adults. Everything seemed perfect. The first crack appeared 3 months before the wedding. I had stopped by Charlotte's flat unexpectedly to drop off some fabric samples for the bridesmaid dresses. She had not answered my calls all day, which was unusual, so I used the spare key she had given me for emergencies. The flat was quiet when I let myself in, and for a moment I thought she was not home. Then I heard voices from her bedroom, low and urgent. I assumed she had a man over and was about to leave quietly when I caught the words that changed everything. She can't find out, not yet. We need to be more careful. It was Daniel's voice. I would have recognized it anywhere. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain they could hear it. The fabric samples slipped from my fingers, landing on the floor with a soft thud. The voices stopped immediately. Then Charlotte's bedroom door opened, and Daniel stepped out, his face pale with shock. Behind him, I could see my sister sitting on the edge of her bed, her expression unreadable. Emma, Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper, it's not what you think. I have heard that phrase in films and television shows my entire life, and I always thought it was ridiculous. Who says that in real life? Who actually expects someone to believe it? But standing there in my sister's hallway, watching the man I loved emerge from her bedroom, I understood why people say it. It is not a defense. It is a desperate plea for just a few more seconds of normalcy before everything falls apart. What is it then? My voice did not sound like my own. It was calm, steady, almost detached. Explain it to me. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, then looked back at Charlotte for help. She rose from the bed, smoothing her dress, and walked toward me with a sympathetic smile. Emma, darling, please don't overreact. We were just discussing something. A surprise for the wedding, that's all. A surprise? I repeated flatly. In your bedroom, with the door closed, that you couldn't tell me about. It's complicated. Charlotte reached for my arm, and I flinched away from her touch. Something flickered in her eyes, there and gone in an instant. Irritation. No, more than that. Contempt. You're clearly upset, and I understand that this looks bad, but I promise you there's a perfectly innocent explanation. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I wanted to believe her so badly that I almost let myself. But then I looked at Daniel, really looked at him, and saw the guilt written across his features. He could not meet my eyes. His hands were trembling, and his shirt was buttoned wrong, the fabric misaligned in a way that happens only when someone dresses in a hurry. The surprise, I said slowly, must have been quite involved. Your shirt's buttoned wrong, Daniel. He looked down and his face crumbled. In that moment, I watched him make a decision, and somehow that was almost worse than the betrayal itself. I watched him choose whether to lie to me again or tell the truth, and I saw the exact second he decided that lies were easier. I changed quickly, he said. I spilled coffee earlier and Charlotte lent me her bathroom. Her bathroom, I repeated. And you couldn't button your shirt properly because he was rushing. Charlotte cut in smoothly. Really, Emma, you're being paranoid. It's unattractive. Unattractive. My sister had just called my distress unattractive while she was quite possibly sleeping with my fiancé. Something inside me snapped, quietly but completely, like a string stretched too tight, finally breaking. You're right, I said, and I was proud of how steady my voice remained. I'm being silly. I'm sorry for barging in. I'll leave the samples in the kitchen. They both visibly relaxed, and that relaxation told me everything I needed to know. They believed I was too naive, too trusting, too desperate to believe the best in them to see what was right in front of my face. They thought they had won. I left the flat without another word, walked to the tube station, and rode home in a daze. Daniel texted me 3 times on the journey, each message more casual than the last, as if nothing had happened. By the time I reached my flat, I had made a decision. I was not going to confront them. Not yet. First, I was going to find out exactly how deep this betrayal went. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction between Charlotte and Daniel that I had ever witnessed. The way she touched his arm when she laughed at his jokes. The way he looked at her when he thought I was not watching. The inside jokes that had developed between them, the ones they always brushed off as nothing. How many times had I dismissed my own instincts because I trusted them both so completely? I thought about my mother's favorite saying, trust but verify. She had meant it about car mechanics and contractors, not about sisters and fiancés, but the principle seemed horrifyingly applicable. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in my career. Then I began to investigate, and I am not proud of what I did next. It felt like a violation, even as I was doing it, a betrayal of the trust that Daniel and I had built together, but I needed to know. I needed proof that I was not imagining things, that my instincts were correct, that the 2 people I loved most in the world were stabbing me in the back. Daniel and I shared a cloud storage account for wedding planning documents. He had set it up months ago, syncing our calendars and photo albums and notes about vendors. I had never thought to look through his personal files on the account because I trusted him. That morning, I logged in and began to search. At first, I found nothing incriminating. Our shared folders were exactly what they should be: venue contracts, guest lists, menu options. But then I noticed a folder I had never seen before, tucked away in a corner of the account and labeled with a string of random numbers. My heart pounding, I clicked it open. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Charlotte and Daniel at restaurants I did not recognize. Charlotte and Daniel on a beach somewhere tropical, her head resting on his shoulder. Charlotte and Daniel kissing in front of a Christmas tree that I had never seen before. The dates on the files stretched back over a year, which meant this had started before Daniel had even proposed to me. I sat there for a long time, scrolling through the evidence of my fiancé's affair with my sister, feeling something die inside me with each new image. Then I noticed the messages. He had backed up his text conversations to the cloud as well, and with shaking hands, I began to read. The first messages were flirtatious but innocent, the kind of banter that could be explained away as friendly teasing. But as the weeks progressed, the tone shifted. Daniel began confiding in Charlotte about our relationship, sharing details that made me feel physically ill. He complained about my lack of spontaneity. He told her I was boring in comparison to her. He said he wished he had met her first. And Charlotte responded with sympathy and affection, always careful to position herself as the understanding confidant, the exciting alternative, the woman I could never be. One message in particular stood out. It was from Charlotte, sent the night before Daniel proposed to me. Are you sure about this? Once you ask her, it'll be harder to walk away. Daniel's response? I know, but her family has connections and she's the safe choice. You're the one I want, but we have to be smart about this. Give me time. I'll figure out a way for us to be together. The safe choice. I was the safe choice. Not the love of his life, not his soulmate, not even his preference. I was a stepping stone, a means to an end, and my sister was the prize he was working toward. I closed the laptop and sat in silence for what felt like hours. The sun rose higher in the sky, filling my flat with light, and I watched it without really seeing. My entire life had been built on a foundation that did not exist. My engagement was a lie. My relationship with my sister was a lie. Every happy memory I had of the three of us together was now tainted by the knowledge that I had been the fool at the center of a cruel joke. When I finally moved again, it was with a sense of purpose that surprised me. I was not going to cry. I was not going to scream. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. Instead, I was going to plan. Over the next few weeks, I became an actress. I smiled at Daniel over breakfast and asked about his day. I called Charlotte to discuss bridesmaid dress alterations and pretended to care about her opinions. I played the role of the happy, naive fiancé so convincingly that neither of them suspected a thing. Meanwhile, I was documenting everything. I hired a private investigator, a discreet woman named Helen, who came highly recommended by a colleague at work. She confirmed what I already knew within days. Daniel and Charlotte had been meeting regularly at a boutique hotel in Kensington, always paying in cash, always booking under fake names. Helen provided me with photographs, timestamps, and hotel receipts that they had carelessly discarded. She also discovered something I had not expected. Daniel was nearly broke. His architecture firm had lost a major client the year before, and he had been hemorrhaging money ever since. He was 3 months behind on his rent. His credit cards were maxed out. He had taken out a personal loan that he was struggling to repay. When I thought about his proposal, about the beautiful ring he had presented me with in Hyde Park, I felt sick. He had probably maxed out another credit card to buy it, viewing it as an investment in his future access to my family's money. Because that was the thing about my family that I had always tried to downplay. We had money. Not ostentatious wealth, but comfortable wealth. The kind that accumulates over generations. My father had built a successful import business that he sold for a considerable sum before he retired. My mother had inherited property from her parents. Charlotte and I both stood to inherit substantial trust funds when we turned 35, and Daniel knew it. He had asked me about my family's finances early in our relationship, phrasing the questions casually as if he were just curious. I'd answered honestly because I had nothing to hide. Now I realized he had been calculating my worth like an accountant evaluating an asset. I took all of this information to Sophie Chen, my best friend since university, and now a solicitor specializing in family law. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the evidence, then sat back and exhaled slowly. "Emma," she said carefully, "what do you want to do about this?" I had thought about that question constantly. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately to watch their faces as they realized they had been caught. But another part, a colder and more calculating part, wanted something more. I wanted justice. I wanted them to feel a fraction of the pain they had caused me. I wanted them to understand that actions have consequences. "I want to expose them," I said, "but not yet. Not until the timing is perfect." Sophie nodded slowly. "You know this is going to hurt your parents, your whole family." "I know. But Charlotte's been hurting our family for years. She's been taking advantage of all of us. It's time they saw who she really is." Over the following weeks, I gathered more evidence. I discovered that Charlotte had been borrowing money from our parents for years, claiming she needed it for rent or unexpected expenses, when in reality she was spending it on designer clothes and holidays. I found out that she had sabotaged at least 3 of my previous relationships, including a particularly promising one in university, by telling the men I was dating lies about my mental health and supposed instability. One of them, a kind boy named Marcus who I had genuinely cared for, had been told by Charlotte that I was obsessive and possessive and that he should run while he still could. He had believed her because she was so charming and convincing, and he had broken up with me without explanation. I had spent months wondering what I had done wrong. I also learned that Charlotte had been telling our parents for years that I was the difficult one, the jealous sibling who resented her success. She had framed every conflict between us as my fault, painting herself as the patient, loving sister who just wanted us to get along. My parents, who loved us both but had always favored Charlotte, had believed her without question. Every time I had felt dismissed or overlooked, it was because Charlotte had been whispering in their ears, ensuring that I would always be seen as the lesser daughter. The depth of her betrayal took my breath away. This was not just an affair. This was a lifelong campaign of manipulation, lies, and destruction. Charlotte had been undermining me since childhood, and I'd been too blind and too desperate for her love to see it. I decided that the wedding would be the stage for her downfall. The ceremony was scheduled for the last Saturday in June at a beautiful country estate in the Cotswolds. 200 guests had confirmed attendance, including family members, friends, colleagues, and several of my father's former business associates. It was going to be the social event of the season, and Charlotte had worked tirelessly to ensure that every detail was perfect. She saw it as her masterpiece, the culmination of all her scheming. Daniel would marry me, secure access to my family's wealth, and eventually leave me for her. She would get the man and the money, and I would be left with nothing but humiliation. What she did not know was that I had been making my own plans. 2 weeks before the wedding, I visited my parents in Sussex. It was a difficult conversation, and I will not pretend otherwise. I showed them the evidence I had gathered, the photographs and the messages and the hotel receipts, and I watched their faces transform from confusion to disbelief to anguish. My mother cried. My father sat in stunned silence for nearly an hour, staring at the papers as if he could not comprehend what they meant. "Charlotte did this?" my mother kept saying. "Our Charlotte?" It was the hardest part, seeing their illusions shatter. They had worshipped Charlotte their entire lives, and now they were being forced to confront the reality of who she truly was. Part of me felt guilty for destroying their faith in her, but a larger part knew they deserved the truth no matter how painful. In the end, my father was the one who made the decision. "The wedding goes ahead," he said grimly, "but not the way Charlotte expects." I returned to London with my parents' full support and began the final phase of my plan. Sophie helped me draft new documents, including a prenuptial agreement that Daniel would never have the opportunity to sign, and a detailed timeline of what would happen on the wedding day. I rehearsed my speech until I could deliver it without trembling. I prepared copies of the evidence to distribute to key guests, and I waited, counting down the days until justice would finally be served. Daniel noticed nothing. He was too busy planning his future with Charlotte, meeting her at their usual hotel, and discussing what they would do once he had access to my money. I know this because Helen was still watching them, still documenting every encounter, still gathering evidence that would ensure their destruction was complete. Charlotte noticed nothing either. She was too busy playing the perfect sister, fussing over my dress and my hair and my makeup, assuring me that my wedding day would be the happiest day of my life. Every time she smiled at me, I felt the cold weight of her betrayal pressing against my chest. Every time she told me she loved me, I wanted to scream the truth in her face. But I held back. I stayed calm. I kept my mask firmly in place. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect summer day that feels like a gift. I woke up in the bridal suite of the estate, surrounded by my bridesmaids, and for just a moment, I allowed myself to feel the grief I had been suppressing for months. This should have been the happiest day of my life. Instead, it was going to be the day I destroyed my sister and ended my engagement in front of everyone we knew. Charlotte arrived at 9 o'clock, carrying coffee and pastries and a bright smile. She hugged me tightly, told me I looked beautiful, and began helping me with my makeup. As she applied powder to my cheeks, I studied her face in the mirror. I searched for some sign of guilt, some flicker of remorse, but there was nothing. She was completely at ease, utterly convinced that she had won. "You're going to be so happy," she said, meeting my eyes in the reflection. "I just know it." "I am happy," I replied, "happier than I've ever been." And in that moment, I meant it. Not because I was about to marry Daniel, but because I was about to set myself free. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the estate's garden, where white chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing a flower-covered arch. Guests began arriving at 1, and I watched from my window as they took their seats, greeting each other and admiring the decorations. Daniel arrived looking handsome in his tailored suit, shaking hands and accepting congratulations with an ease that made my stomach turn. Charlotte hovered near him, touching his arm, laughing at his jokes, playing her role perfectly. At 1:30, my father came to escort me downstairs. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Pride mixed with sorrow, love mixed with righteous anger. "Are you ready?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "Yes." The wedding march began, and I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, past 200 faces that blurred into a sea of color and light. Daniel was waiting at the altar, smiling the smile I had once loved, and Charlotte was standing just behind him, her own smile barely containing her triumph. The officiant welcomed everyone and began his speech about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. And then it was my turn to speak. I had written vows, beautiful vows that I had planned to recite before I discovered the truth. I reached into my bouquet, where I had hidden a folded piece of paper, and withdrew it. But instead of reading the words I had once believed, I looked out at the assembled guests and began to speak. "Before I make any promises to Daniel," I said, my voice clear and steady, "there's something you all need to know." The confusion on Daniel's face was instantaneous. He glanced at Charlotte, who shook her head almost imperceptibly, signaling that she did not know what was happening. I saw fear flicker in her eyes, the first crack in her perfect composure. "For the past year," I continued, "my fiancé has been having an affair. Not with a stranger, not with a colleague, but with someone I trusted completely. Someone who was supposed to love me more than anyone else in the world. Someone who I thought was my best friend as well as my sister." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Daniel's face went white. Charlotte took a step backward, her hand flying to her throat. "Charlotte," I said, turning to face her directly, "did you really think I wouldn't find out?" "Emma." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You don't understand. It's not what you think." "It's not what I think?" I reached into my bouquet again and pulled out a stack of photographs, holding them up for the guests to see. These were taken at a hotel in Kensington over the past 12 months. There are dozens more. There are also text messages, which I'm happy to share with anyone who's interested. My personal favorite is the one where Daniel describes me as the safe choice and says he'll figure out a way to leave me for you. The silence was deafening. I could see my mother in the front row, her face streaming with tears, and my father standing beside her with an expression of cold fury. Daniel had not moved, had not spoken, had not even tried to defend himself. He stood frozen at the altar, his perfect facade crumbling before my eyes. "This wedding is over," I said. "Not because I'm heartbroken, although I was for a long time, but because I refuse to stand here and make promises to a man who has been lying to me since the day we met. And I refuse to pretend any longer that my sister is anything other than the manipulative, deceitful, jealous person she has always been." I turned to Daniel, removed my engagement ring, and placed it in his hand. "We're done. I hope the two of you are very happy together. You deserve each other." Then I walked back down the aisle, my head held high, past the shocked faces of our guests and out of the garden. Behind me, I could hear chaos erupting. Voices raised, chairs scraping, Charlotte crying and protesting her innocence. But I did not look back. I kept walking until I reached the car that was waiting for me at the front of the estate, and then I drove away without a backward glance. The fallout from the canceled wedding was swift and devastating. News traveled quickly through our social circles, and within days, everyone knew what Daniel and Charlotte had done. The photographs I had distributed at the ceremony were shared and reshared until there was no corner of our world that had not seen them. Daniel's architecture firm dropped him almost immediately, citing concerns about his character and judgment. Charlotte's PR agency fired her within a week, claiming they could not employ someone whose personal conduct was so incompatible with their professional standards. My parents cut Charlotte off completely. They changed the locks on the family home, removed her from their will, and made it clear that she was no longer welcome in their lives. It was a harsh consequence, but my father argued that she had brought it on herself through decades of manipulation and lies. My mother struggled more, her love for her firstborn warring with her fury at what Charlotte had done. But in the end, she sided with me. Charlotte tried to contact me several times in the weeks that followed. She sent emails pleading for forgiveness, claiming that she had been led astray by Daniel and that she deeply regretted her actions. She left voicemails that alternated between tearful apologies and angry accusations, blaming me for ruining her life and destroying her reputation. I deleted all of them without responding. Daniel also attempted to reach out. He sent a long letter explaining that his affair with Charlotte had been a mistake born of weakness and confusion, that he had always loved me more, that he was willing to do whatever it took to earn back my trust. I read the letter once, then burned it in my kitchen sink. I was done with both of them. They had used me, manipulated me, and betrayed me in the cruelest possible way. They had viewed me as a means to an end, a stepping stone to wealth and status. And now they were facing the consequences of their choices. But the consequences did not end there. In the months following the canceled wedding, I began to rebuild my life. I threw myself into my work with a focus and determination that surprised even me. I was promoted twice within the year, becoming the youngest senior manager in my company's history. I moved to a new flat, one without any memories of Daniel, and filled it with things that made me happy: books and plants and art that I loved. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and slowly, carefully began to trust again. Sophie was instrumental in this process. She had been there for me throughout the entire ordeal, offering legal advice and emotional support in equal measure. She was the one who reminded me that I was more than Charlotte's sister or Daniel's fiancé. I was my own person, with my own worth, and I deserved to be happy. "You've been through something terrible," she said one evening, as we shared a bottle of wine in my new flat. "But you've also shown incredible strength. Most people would have fallen apart, but you held yourself together and fought back. That's not nothing." I knew she was right, but it was difficult to feel strong when I was still processing the trauma of what had happened. The betrayal had cut deep, and the wounds were slow to heal. Some nights I lay awake replaying conversations from years past, searching for signs I had missed, wondering how I could have been so blind. Other nights I dreamed of Charlotte, not as she was now, but as she had been when we were children. My beautiful, beloved older sister, the person I had wanted to be like more than anyone in the world. Those were the nights that hurt the most. 6 months after the canceled wedding, I received a phone call from my mother. Charlotte was in trouble. She had been evicted from her flat after failing to pay rent for 3 months. She was living with friends, moving from sofa to sofa, unable to hold down a job because her reputation had been so thoroughly destroyed. She was depressed, my mother said, and possibly suicidal. She needed help. I listened to my mother's words and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sympathy, nothing. The girl who had once idolized her sister was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that some people are beyond saving. "I'm sorry," I said, "but Charlotte made her choices. She has to live with them." My mother cried, begged, tried every emotional appeal she could think of, but I remained firm. I had spent my entire life bending to Charlotte's will, sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of family harmony. I was not going to do it anymore. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I thought about all the years I'd spent seeking Charlotte's approval, all the times I'd made myself smaller so she could feel bigger. I thought about the relationship she had sabotaged, the lies she had told, the systematic way she had undermined me from childhood onward, and I realized something important. I was not the one who had destroyed our family. Charlotte had done that all on her own. I had simply refused to let her continue. The realization was liberating. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. Free from Charlotte's shadow, free from the need to be the perfect younger sister, free from the exhausting performance of pretending everything was fine when it was not. The chains that had bound me for so long had finally broken, and I could see the future stretching out before me, full of possibility. I did not know then that the hardest part was still to come, that Charlotte's desperation would drive her to new lows, that the consequences of her actions would ripple outward in ways I could never have predicted, and that before everything was over, I would be forced to make choices that would test my strength, my principles, and my very sense of who I was. But that is a story for another time. For now, let me tell you about the year that followed the canceled wedding, the year when I learned what it truly means to rebuild a life from ashes, and when I discovered that revenge, no matter how justified, always comes with a price. 1 year after I walked away from my wedding, I was a different person. Not better exactly, but stronger. The raw grief had dulled to a manageable ache, and I had learned to carry it without letting it crush me. I still thought about Daniel and Charlotte sometimes, usually late at night when my defenses were down, but the thoughts no longer destroyed me. They were memories of a life I had left behind, and I was busy building a new one. My career was thriving. The promotion I had received put me in charge of a team of 12, and I discovered that I had a talent for leadership. I was fair but firm, demanding excellence while also supporting my team members' growth. My boss began mentioning the possibility of a director level position within the next few years. For someone who had always felt like she was second best, the validation was intoxicating. I also began dating again, cautiously at first, then with more confidence. I went on dinners and drinks with men who seemed kind and genuine, though none of them sparked the intense connection I had once felt with Daniel. That was probably for the best. I was not looking for intensity anymore. I was looking for stability, for honesty, for someone who would love me for who I was, rather than what I could offer them. Sophie worried that I was closing myself off emotionally, protecting myself so fiercely that I would never let anyone in again. Perhaps she was right, but after everything I had been through, I could not apologize for being careful with my heart. It was during this period of relative peace that Charlotte resurfaced in my life. I was at work in the middle of a meeting with a potential client when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I glanced at it quickly, expecting spam, and nearly dropped my phone. Emma, please, I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Sai. I excused myself from the meeting and stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding. I had blocked Charlotte's number months ago, along with all her social media accounts and email addresses. She must have gotten a new phone to contact me. The thought of her going to such lengths made me simultaneously angry and uneasy. I did not respond. I deleted the message and returned to my meeting, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. But over the following days, more messages arrived. Charlotte was relentless, sending text after text from different numbers, each one more desperate than the last. I know you hate me. I deserve it. But something has happened and I don't know who else to turn to. Please, Emma, you're the only family I have left. I made terrible mistakes. I know that, but I'm trying to make amends. Just give me a chance to explain. I ignored them all. Charlotte had spent years manipulating me, and I was not going to fall for her tactics again. Her claims of wanting to make amends were almost certainly just another strategy to worm her way back into my life. I had worked too hard to heal to let her destroy my progress. But then she showed up at my flat. I came home from work one evening to find her sitting on the steps outside my building. She looked terrible, a shadow of the glamorous woman she had once been. Her hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were wrinkled and worn. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and she had lost weight. Too much weight. Her cheekbones jutting out sharply beneath her skin. Emma. She stood when she saw me, her hands twisting nervously. Thank God. I've been waiting for hours. You shouldn't be here. I kept my voice flat, my expression neutral. I have nothing to say to you. Please, just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I should have walked past her. I should have gone inside and locked the door and called the police if necessary. But something in her face stopped me. A raw desperation that I'd never seen before. Not even when our grandparents died, or when she failed her university exams. Charlotte had always been so composed, so in control. Seeing her like this, broken and begging, stirred something uncomfortable in my chest. 5 minutes, I heard myself say, and then you leave. We went to a cafe down the street, a neutral space where I would not feel cornered. Charlotte ordered tea but did not drink it, just wrapped her hands around the cup as if seeking warmth. I ordered nothing and sat across from her, waiting. I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, she began, her voice trembling. And I'm not going to make excuses for what I did. It was wrong. All of it was wrong. The affair, the lies, everything. I was jealous of you, Emma. I've been jealous of you my whole life. I stared at her. Jealous of me? That's ridiculous. You had everything. You were the favorite. Everyone loved you. Everyone loved what they thought I was. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. The pretty one, the charming one, the perfect daughter. But you were the smart one, the capable one. You didn't need anyone's approval. You just did things because you wanted to, and you were good at them. I spent my entire life trying to live up to expectations I could never meet, and watching you succeed without even trying made me hate myself. It was easier to hate you instead. I did not know what to say. This was not the conversation I had expected. I had anticipated more manipulation, more lies, more attempts to shift blame. Instead, Charlotte seemed to be offering genuine accountability for the first time in her life. What happened with Daniel wasn't about love, she continued. It was about proving that I could take something from you, that I was still superior in some way. But when it all fell apart, when I lost everything, I realized that I had destroyed the only relationship that ever really mattered to me. I destroyed us, Emma, and I'll never forgive myself for that. The tears were falling freely now, dripping down her cheeks and onto the table. Part of me wanted to reach out and comfort her, the instinct ingrained from years of being her little sister. But a larger part remembered all the times she had cried to get what she wanted, all the tears she had weaponized to manipulate our parents and friends and romantic partners. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "What do you want?" Charlotte wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I found something out. Something about Daniel, and I thought you should know." The mention of his name sent a chill through me. I had not heard from Daniel since I burned his letter. By all accounts, he had disappeared from our social circles entirely, presumably to rebuild his life somewhere far from the wreckage he had created. "What about him?" Charlotte hesitated, and for a moment I thought she was going to lose her nerve. Then she took a deep breath and spoke the words that changed everything. "He's getting married to someone else, a woman named Victoria Ashford. She's the daughter of a property development billionaire. They're engaged and the wedding is in 2 months." I absorbed this information slowly, turning it over in my mind. Daniel was engaged. After everything he had done, after the exposure and the humiliation, he had found someone else to deceive, someone with even more money than my family. "Why should I care?" I asked. "Daniel is in my past. What he does now is none of my business, because Victoria doesn't know." Charlotte leaned forward, her expression urgent. "She doesn't know about me, about you, about any of it. Daniel has reinvented himself completely. New name, new backstory, new everything. He's telling her he was never married, never engaged, that his previous relationship ended amicably years ago. She has no idea she's marrying a con artist." A cold fury began to build in my chest. Not because Daniel had moved on, I had genuinely made peace with that, but because he was doing it again. He was targeting another woman, spinning the same lies, planning to exploit her the same way he had tried to exploit me. And Victoria, whoever she was, had no idea what she was walking into. "How do you know all this?" "I've been keeping tabs on him." Charlotte looked down at her hands. "I know it sounds obsessive, but I wanted to see if karma would catch up with him. When I found out about Victoria, I did some digging. I found his new social media profiles, his LinkedIn, everything. He's using the name David I did not know, then that the hardest part was still to come. That Charlotte's desperation would drive her to new lows. That the consequences of her actions would ripple outward in ways I could never have predicted. And that before everything was over, I would be forced to make choices that would test my strength, my principles, and my very sense of who I was. But that is a story for another time. For now, let me tell you about the year that followed the canceled wedding, the year when I learned what it truly means to rebuild a life from ashes, and when I discovered that revenge, no matter how justified, always comes with a price. Morrison now, and he's claiming to be widowed. He's even shown her fake photographs of a deceased wife. The depths of Daniel's deception were staggering. He had not just moved on, he had created an entirely new identity to perpetrate the same con on a new victim. And if Victoria's family was as wealthy as Charlotte claimed, the stakes were even higher than they had been with me. I can't just sit back and let him do this again. The words were out of my mouth before I fully processed them. She deserves to know the truth. Charlotte nodded eagerly. "That's why I came to you. I thought maybe we could warn her together. I know I have no credibility, but you do. People believe you, Emma. They always have." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and tried to understand what she was offering. Was this genuine remorse or just another manipulation? Was she truly trying to make amends, or was she using Victoria as a way to worm back into my life? I did not know, and in that moment, I realized it did not matter. Whether Charlotte's motives were pure or selfish, the fact remained that an innocent woman was about to marry a predator. I could not stand by and let that happen, regardless of my complicated feelings toward my sister. I need to think about this, I said finally. Give me your new number. I'll be in touch. Charlotte's face lit up with hope, and for a second she looked like the sister I remembered from childhood, the one I had adored before everything went wrong. Then the moment passed, and she was just a broken woman sitting across from me in a cafe, hoping for a chance at redemption. I went home that night and began to research. Victoria Ashford was easy to find. Her family was prominent in London society, and her engagement to David Morrison had been announced in several gossip columns. The photographs showed a beautiful woman in her late 20s, blonde and elegant, gazing adoringly at a man I recognized all too well despite his new name and slightly altered appearance. Daniel had grown a beard and changed his hairstyle, but the eyes were the same: cold, calculating, utterly devoid of genuine emotion. I dug deeper and found Victoria's social media accounts. She seemed happy, genuinely happy, in a way that made my heart ache with secondhand grief. She had no idea what was coming. She was planning her dream wedding to a man she believed loved her, when in reality he was just counting down the days until he could access her family's fortune. I could not let that happen. Over the next few weeks, I built a case. I gathered all the evidence I had from my own relationship with Daniel: the photographs, the messages, the private investigators' reports, and combined it with new information I discovered about his current deception. Sophie helped me verify the legal implications of what I was planning, ensuring that I would not be exposed to accusations of harassment or defamation. Everything I planned to share with Victoria was true and documented, which meant I was protected. The hardest part was deciding how to approach her. I could not simply send a stranger an email claiming her fiancé was a fraud. She would dismiss it as the ravings of a jealous ex. I needed to be strategic, to present the information in a way that she could not ignore. In the end, I decided on a direct approach. I discovered that Victoria regularly attended charity events hosted by her mother's foundation, and I bought a ticket to the next one. It was expensive, nearly a month's wages, but I considered it an investment in justice. The event was held at a grand hotel in Mayfair, all crystal chandeliers and champagne towers and women dripping in diamonds. I felt out of place in my simple black dress, but I forced myself to blend in, accepting a glass of sparkling water and scanning the crowd for my target. I spotted Victoria near the stage, chatting with a group of older women who appeared to be donors. She was even more beautiful in person, with a warm smile and an easy laugh that made people gravitate toward her. I felt a pang of something like guilt at what I was about to do. I was going to shatter her happiness, her trust, her entire understanding of her life. But the alternative was allowing Daniel to destroy her the way he had tried to destroy me. I waited until she stepped away from the group, heading toward the bar for a fresh drink, and I intercepted her. I've been keeping tabs on him. Charlotte looked down at her hands. I know it sounds obsessive, but I wanted to see if karma would catch up with him. When I found out about Victoria, I did some digging. I found his new social media profiles, his LinkedIn, everything. He's using the name David I did not know, then that the hardest part was still to come. That Charlotte's desperation would drive her to new lows. That the consequences of her actions would ripple outward in ways I could never have predicted. And that before everything was over, I would be forced to make choices that would test my strength, my principles, and my very sense of who I was. But that is a story for another time. For now, let me tell you about the year that followed the canceled wedding. The year when I learned what it truly means to rebuild a life from ashes, and when I discovered that revenge, no matter how justified, always comes with a price. Excuse me, I said, keeping my voice low. Are you Victoria Ashford? She turned, her expression open and friendly. I am. Do I know you? No, but I know your fiancé. Except his name isn't David Morrison. It's Daniel Morrison. And before you became engaged to him, he was engaged to me. The color drained from Victoria's face. For a long moment, she stared at me without speaking, her eyes searching my face for signs of deception. I remained calm, steady, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I don't know who you are," she said finally, "but this is neither the time nor the place for whatever joke this is." "It's not a joke." I reached into my clutch and withdrew a manila envelope. "Everything is documented: photographs, text messages, hotel receipts. Your fiancé has been lying to you since the day you met. He's not widowed. He was never married. And he's only interested in your family's money." Victoria looked at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Her hand trembled slightly as she took it, but she did not open it. "This is insane," she whispered. "David loves me. He wouldn't—" I thought the same thing. My voice softened despite my resolve. I was supposed to marry him. I found out 2 weeks before the wedding that he had been having an affair with my sister for over a year. They had been meeting at hotels, planning a future together, laughing at me behind my back. The only reason I found out was because I walked in on them. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She still had not opened the envelope, but her grip on it had tightened until her knuckles were white. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this," I continued, "but I couldn't let him do to you what he tried to do to me. You deserve to know the truth before it's too late." I turned and walked away before she could respond. I did not look back. I had done what I came to do, and now the decision was in her hands. The following weeks were agonizing. I had no way of knowing whether Victoria had looked at the evidence, whether she had confronted Daniel, whether anything I had done had made a difference. I tried to distract myself with work and friends and the routine of daily life, but my mind kept returning to that conversation in Mayfair. Then Sophie called with news. "Have you seen the papers today?" Her voice was practically vibrating with excitement. I had not. I had been in meetings all morning and had not had time to check the news. Sophie sent me a link, and I clicked on it with trembling fingers. The headline read, "Ashford Iris ends engagement amid fraud allegations." I read the article 3 times, my heart racing. Victoria had not only ended her engagement, she had gone public with everything. She had provided the media with copies of the documents I had given her, along with a statement explaining that she had been deceived by a man using a false identity. The article mentioned Daniel by his real name, included photographs from our canceled wedding, and detailed his history of targeting wealthy women for financial gain. By the end of the day, Daniel's face was everywhere. News outlets picked up the story, social media exploded with commentary, and journalists began investigating his past. They uncovered things even I had not known. A previous relationship in Scotland that had ended when the woman discovered he was stealing from her. A series of bad business deals that had left investors out of pocket. A trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts stretching back over a decade. Daniel Morrison was not just a cheater. He was a serial con artist, and his exposure was long overdue. I received a message from Victoria a week after the story broke. It was brief but heartfelt. "Thank you. I don't have the words to express how grateful I am. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." I did not respond. I did not need to. Knowing that I had prevented another woman from suffering the way I had suffered was reward enough. But the story did not end there. Charlotte called me the day after the news broke, sobbing with what seemed like genuine relief. "He can't hurt anyone else now," she said. "It's finally over." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that exposing Daniel had brought her some measure of closure, that she was genuinely relieved rather than calculating her next move. But I had learned the hard way not to trust Charlotte's emotions. "Don't contact me again, Unsa," I said. "I'm glad we were able to stop Daniel, but that doesn't change what you did. I can't have you in my life." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Charlotte spoke again, her voice was small and defeated. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for everything. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person, even if you never see it." She hung up before I could respond. In the months that followed, I heard occasional updates about Charlotte through mutual acquaintances. She had enrolled in therapy, they said, and was working hard to address the issues that had driven her behavior. She had gotten a job at a nonprofit organization, earning far less than she once had, but apparently finding satisfaction in helping others. She had even reconnected with some of the people she had hurt over the years, making amends where possible. I did not know whether to believe any of it. Charlotte had always been skilled at presenting the face she thought people wanted to see. But some part of me, the part that still remembered the sister I'd loved, hoped it was true. Daniel's story had a less ambiguous ending. The publicity surrounding his exposure led to criminal investigations, and he was eventually charged with fraud related to the Scottish case and several others. The trial was brief. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. I did not attend the proceedings, but I read about them in the papers with a sense of grim satisfaction. Justice had finally been served. 2 years after my canceled wedding, I met someone new. His name was James, and he was nothing like Daniel. He was quiet where Daniel had been charming, steady where Daniel had been exciting, genuine where Daniel had been manipulative. We met at a bookshop, both reaching for the same novel, and the conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. He asked for my number at the end of it, and I gave it to him without hesitation. Our relationship developed slowly, built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. I told him about Daniel and Charlotte early on, laying out the whole ugly story because I refused to start a new relationship with secrets. James listened without judgment, then took my hand and told me he was sorry I had been through something so terrible. "But I'm glad you're here now," he added. "And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you never feel that kind of pain again." I believed him. Not because he said the right words, but because his actions consistently matched his promises. He was patient when I struggled to trust, understanding when my past made me suspicious, supportive when old wounds resurfaced. He loved me not despite my scars, but with full knowledge of them. We got married on a rainy afternoon in October, 3 years after we met. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends, held in the garden of his parents' house in Cornwall. I wore a simple dress and carried wildflowers, and when I said my vows, I meant every word. My parents were there, older now but still strong, their love for me evident in every proud glance. They had supported me through everything, even when it meant cutting their eldest daughter out of their lives. I knew the choice had been painful for them, especially for my mother, but they had made it anyway because they finally understood who Charlotte really was. Charlotte was not invited to the wedding. I had not spoken to her in years, and while I occasionally wondered about her life, I had no desire to reconnect. Some relationships are too broken to repair, and ours was one of them. I had made peace with that. Sophie was my maid of honor, a role she performed with characteristic wit and warmth. She had been by my side through every phase of this journey, and I could not imagine celebrating without her. As James and I exchanged rings, I felt something shift inside me, a final letting go of the anger and grief that had defined so much of my adult life. I was not the woman Charlotte had tried to destroy. I was not the naive girl Daniel had tried to exploit. I was someone stronger, wiser, more resilient than I'd ever imagined possible. And I was finally, truly happy. That night, after the guests had gone home and James and I were alone in our room, I stood at the window and looked out at the rain. The drops caught the light from the street lamps, turning the world into a shimmering, golden blur. I thought about all the paths that had led me to this moment. The betrayal, the exposure, the long and painful process of healing. I thought about the revenge I had enacted and the consequences that had followed. I thought about my sister, somewhere out there in the night, living whatever life she had made for herself. And I realized something important. Revenge had not healed me. It had given me satisfaction, yes, and a sense of justice that I desperately needed. But the healing had come from somewhere else, from the work I had done on myself, from the support of people who genuinely loved me, from the gradual process of learning to trust again. Revenge was a chapter in my story, not the conclusion. The conclusion was this: standing in a room with my husband, looking out at the rain, feeling more at peace than I had ever been. I turned away from the window and walked toward James, who was watching me with a soft smile. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Everything is perfect," I said. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, it was true. The years that followed were quiet and good. James and I built a life together, filled with small joys and ordinary challenges, and the kind of deep contentment that comes from being truly known and loved. We had children, two daughters who had their father's kindness and my determination. We bought a house in the countryside, far from the city and the memories it held. We grew older together, weathering losses and celebrating victories, always facing the future as partners. I never saw Charlotte again. According to the occasional updates I received through family friends, she had remained in London, working at the nonprofit and living a modest, solitary life. She never married, never had children, never fully escaped the shadow of what she had done. I did not feel satisfaction at hearing this, only a distant kind of sadness for the person she might have been, if jealousy and insecurity had not consumed her. Daniel, I heard, died in prison during his second year of incarceration. A heart attack, they said, though I suspected the stress of his circumstances had contributed. I did not mourn him. I did not celebrate either. He was simply gone. A footnote in a story that had long since moved past him. Sometimes on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and James was reading beside me, I allowed myself to think about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the revenge, the rebuilding of my life from ashes. I thought about the sister who had turned into my enemy and the choices I'd made in response. I examined those memories with the detachment of distance, seeing them clearly in a way I could not when I was living through them. What I understood now with the wisdom of years was that betrayal changes you in ways you cannot anticipate. It strips away your illusions about the world and the people in it. It forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about trust and love and vulnerability. But it also offers an opportunity, one that is easy to miss when you are consumed by pain, but available nonetheless. The opportunity to rebuild yourself, stronger and wiser, on a foundation of your own making. I had taken that opportunity. I had refused to let Charlotte and Daniel's betrayal define the rest of my life. I had sought justice, yes, but I had also done the harder work of healing. And in the end, I had found something more valuable than revenge. I had found peace. I had found my sister turned into my enemy, and it was the most painful experience of my life. But it also set me free. It broke the chains of my desperate need for her approval and forced me to see her clearly for the first time. It taught me that love without boundaries is not love at all, and that some relationships are too toxic to save. I am grateful for the life I have now, the husband who cherishes me, and the children who bring me joy, and the career that continues to challenge and reward me. I am grateful for the friends who stood by me when everything fell apart, especially Sophie, whose loyalty never wavered. And I am even grateful, in a strange way, for the trials I endured. They showed me what I was capable of surviving, and they led me to where I am today. If you are listening to this story and you have experienced something similar, if someone you loved and trusted has betrayed you in ways you never imagined possible, please know this: you will survive. It will hurt, sometimes unbearably, and you will question everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world. But you are stronger than you realize. And on the other side of this pain, there is a life waiting for you, a life of your own creation, built on your own terms. Do not let the person who betrayed you define your story. Write your own ending. My sister turned into my enemy. But in the end, I turned into the person I was always meant to be. And that, more than any revenge I could have imagined, was the greatest victory of all.